Hey everyone, my name is Francisco Escobar and welcome to the second season of Conversamos. As we continue our It All Starts at Home edition, today's video is going to be on growing up and raising male Latinos. All here as Latin Entertainment presents Conversamos.
Yo, is it that wrong? I'm making a song, I'm taking it back for the platform that I formed. You should chop it and transform. I run the reservoir, the predator, like a hungry carnivore. When I'm breaking through these heavy doors, this is Desert Storm. A metaphor to show I'm equipped and informed. I'm striking with the mega force.
We have an expert panel ready to discuss their experience growing up and raising as a male Latino. But first, we'd like to share that starting next week, we are spotlighting Latino-owned businesses and fundraising initiatives. We have some great submissions from various entrepreneurs and activists around the country, and we hope to gather more. Link is in the description as well as on your screen. Come check it out. Let me introduce to you our panel. We have Jo Luis Silau, Malena Martin, Nelson Araque, and Joshua Pichado. Thank you all for joining us. And now with our first question, how would you describe your experience growing up as a male Latino? And if you're a parent, how would you describe your experience growing up and how has that affected you raising your children?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. As a first-generation Cuban American, the whole point is to assimilate and to be straight with you, to be as white as possible. And that happens outside of the doors of your home. And then inside the doors of my home, it was all Spanish all the time. So that's how I grew up. And how I grew up affects my children. Their father, who was my first husband, is fourth-generation Mexican American. So he didn't even speak Spanish when I met him. He actually learned while he was married to me to brush up on his Spanish and really get more comfortable with it. And I started off by teaching my children Spanish and then got impatient, and stopped teaching them because I thought I was getting in their way. And then looking back now, all my children are adults. It's almost painful that I didn't teach them Spanish. My youngest, that my grandmother only spoke Spanish. And my youngest felt a really deep connection with her. She was 103 when she passed, and she was the matriarch of our family on my dad's side. And my youngest was so connected to her that he told me when he was 5 that he wanted to learn Spanish. So I taught him Spanish. I got him connected to, the Spanish class in school, and we practiced all the time. And he would ask me, how do I say this to abuela? And I would tell him. And so the way that my culture touched us the most was through my family, my direct family, through their experiences with my grandmother, who we visited every weekend, through their experiences with my father, who is a tall, proud Cuban man, who spoke English, was here since 1968. And a lot of times when I asked him, how do you say this in Spanish, Papi? He would say, I don't know, I don't remember. I've been here for 50 years. So my experience parenting my children, with those sort of competing goals of the family of being sure to assimilate and look as white as possible, as American as possible, and also wanting to be very connected to my family. We're inside the walls of my parents' home. We ate my Cuban food that I grew up with. My children were connected to my Cuban heritage, not so much to their father's Mexican heritage because he wasn't even connected to it. But it was a conflict. It was difficult. And looking back now, I feel like I could have done a better job. And what I'm hoping is that those experiences that they had as young children, even up to the point of being young adults, being exposed to my grandmother and my father and being so connected when we were there at grandpa's house, at abuelo's house, at abuela's house, that those things will carry with them.
I guess as a son, as a first generation as well, Dominican American, my parents came from the Dominican Republic. They didn't meet in the Dominican Republic. They came to New York, and then that's where they met. And I think that definitely just the community, as we can all kind of assume in New York, those who are familiar with New York, the community over there is definitely something that influenced, kind of like gave birth to what it means to be Latino in the U.S. And that's what kind of gave my parents that kind of framework on how to raise me. So once they started having children, And once we moved to Michigan, it was kind of different. Growing up, I was definitely more in touch with my culture, but it was more in a family setting. I never really had it in a social setting. It was always, home. My parents, sacrificed to come here to give us a better life. And that was kind of like always in the back of my mind. So, and again, just like, and I'm sure like everybody else probably here feels, I kind of felt a responsibility to assimilate, because I felt like I needed to assimilate to American culture to, I guess, not waste their opportunity. So it was kind of like, all right, yeah, I could be Dominican in the household, but when I go outside, I'm trying to assimilate with all the other children. And I actually didn't really grow up in a Latino-centric neighborhood. My neighborhood, or the area that I grew up, was mostly African-American. I knew I was Dominican. I knew I spoke Spanish. To this day, I only speak Spanish with my mother. My father got to learn English throughout the time, so I speak to him a good mix of both. We still try to keep it to Spanish, but as he's a native speaker, and I had to learn it through my parents. If he gets frustrated, he'll switch over to English, which is something interesting, because my mom's English isn't that good, so she'll never switch over. She'll just keep continuing to talk to me in Spanish, no matter how frustrating it gets, no matter if I don't know the word. But my dad, if he gets a certain type of way, he's like, okay, we're just gonna switch to English because you know it better. And I think that was an interesting dynamic, especially growing up with my mom. As far as a social setting, I never really had that, community with the Latino community until I got to college. And it wasn't until I got to college that I started meeting other educated Latinos, and Latinos that are actually like, okay, and then that's when I started learning how to navigate how to be Latino outside of the household, and how to be Latino with friends, and with, and how to talk Spanish with people my age. And that was definitely an eye-opening thing. And that's definitely that I've definitely still been trying to grow on, is just kind of, accepting that identity as in every facet of my life, and not just in my home life.
Thank you, Melanie and Joshua. Yeah, Julie?
My parents definitely felt the urgency of needing to assimilate as a priority. And that was just to fit in for employment purposes, be able to communicate with others, and the sense of feeling like assimilation was a way to have access to things. And so whenever I would try to ask about like our cultures, to be honest, like I feel like they just didn't really feel like the need to really just kind of pass that over to me. But it would be funny though, because it would only come whenever there was something that they were proud of, whether it be music, sports, food, or things like that, then they would have no hesitation in claiming where that came from and their connection to it, right? But when it came to the day-to-day stuff, there was kind of like this gap. And so I really had to seek it out. And I think I grew up in a community where one of my first neighborhoods was both Black and Latino community. And then the majority of like my childhood, I grew up in a mostly like Puerto Rican like neighborhood. So, just seeing like the tables outdoors and the playing of the dominoes and all the elderly, that knew absolutely everything that was going on the block, and the music, and which was really great. But then going to different schools, as opportunities came up for me, I started noticing that that diversity was becoming less and less accessible as I had access to more and more opportunities. And I didn't really connect to like-minded people who wanted to have that connection to the culture, excuse me, until college, through a fraternal organization. And that really was what inspired me to try to proactively stay connected and do different things anything that I could stay connected. And that's what I wanted to instill in my children as a parent. So knowing that, in their schools, and in future opportunities, they will be in situations where they will need to assimilate, but I don't want them to lose their heritage. And already being a second generation, just naturally there's going to be that, that loss because of the gap. And so it's like you have to work twice as hard really retain that. And I'm really grateful for the elders in our family, the grandparents and the great grandparents, to have a role in the upbringing of the family. So I really think that oral history and having that cross-generational raising of children is like super important.
Thank you. Nelson?
Okay, for me, it has been a little bit different because I got a scholarship for a master and for my doctorate because I am a Latino. So it was only for Latinos, and I get access to that. So I get access to education, higher education, graduate education, better say, because I am Latino. And as I said in the introduction, I am proud of being a Latino and communicate and express my Latinx, as much as I want. As a parent, my daughter is 13 years old, and she moved in both cultures. She goes in the Latinx and she goes in the Anglo culture with no problem. I speak only in Spanish at home. My wife is from Nicaragua, but her stepfather was from Greece. So she also absorbed all of this Greek culture. So we cook and we eat Nicaraguan or Colombian or Greek, and it doesn't matter. And I stress to my daughter that you need to speak both, and you need to move in both cultures without any distinction, because this is who you are. And I think she's also she speaks very well in Spanish, very well. So it's very interesting, and she presents herself as as Latina. So because we told her to do that, because we are proud. I don't want to assimilate. I don't need to assimilate. I don't need to. So it's because of being Latino that I receive all of these benefits here in this culture.
Thank you, Nelson. And for our next question, for the sons, what have you learned from your parents about your culture? And for the parents, what lessons are you instilling or have instilled in your children?
Interestingly enough, I've been a mom for a long time. I have a 25-year-old, and even before that, I was always sort of like my little sister's mom. And I parent a lot like my dad. I don't parent quite like my mom. I parent like my dad. And my dad was a man of few words and a lot of action. And so that's the way that it's turned out in me. I started with explaining things to my children. And what I noticed is that they didn't do what I explained to them. They did what I did. And so it's something that I picked up from my dad and my mom too. My mom is definitely in the same vein. My dad was such a hard worker. Like, if you look at my titles, like, I even left one out. Like, I do so many different things. Like, I don't have a problem working hard. And that definitely came from my dad. My dad worked 16-hour days. My dad always went down with the ship. He was always the last one to jump off in companies. He was always trying to do his absolute best everywhere he went. And that's something I picked up from him. And that's something that has come across to my children. So much so, though, that it can be a detriment to your health. So my grandmother died at 103. My grandfather died at 90. All of my grandmother's sisters and brothers died either right at 100 or right before 100. We have long lifespans. I love that, right? My children got full experience of my grandmother. But my dad died at 76. And it was because he always put himself last. And I unfortunately did that the majority of my parenting. Like, most of my parenting is done. We have 2 children at home left over after 6. Wow. And those 2 are adults, and they're really easygoing, and I'm sure they'll be on their way when they're ready. But most of my parenting is behind me. But what I know I instilled in them this this desire to work hard. What I hope now, what sort of turned the tide about the time that my 3 oldest children were almost adults, were teenagers, was that I needed to learn and I needed to instill in them how to take care of themselves, how to slow down. You can't stick around and be available and be that 103-year-old grandmother or grandfather if you don't take care of yourself. Because I love my dad, and I'm glad he had a full life. He lived 3 lifetimes in one, but I miss him. And it's selfish. I wish he was here. But one thing he told me before he died, and this is what I'll leave you with. A week before he died, he sat us all down in true, strong Cuban man spirit. And he said, listen to me. He said it in Spanish and English. And he said, perfectionism killed me. Don't let it kill you. And I was like, Papi, you're so right. I'm going to do my best from this moment on to take care of myself. And I know that whatever model I set for my children, that's what they leave with. So my number one job is now, it's not hard for me to work hard. I can do that. My number one job is to take care of myself and to show that model to my loved ones so that they too can take care of themselves, so they can live long lives and have these beautiful experiences with their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren.
My parents. As it relates to culture, I learned 2 different things. So with my mom, I definitely learned more about, you know, the food of my culture. I learned how to properly pronunciate. I learned about movies, media, you know, pop culture in Latin America and more specifically Dominican Republic. You know, music. Every time I listen to anything, you know, bachata, merengue, anything, I think of my mother. My mother is the one that would be blasting that Saturday mornings. That's what she passed on to me. She passed on, you know, the fact, you know, how to work hard, how to give compassion. Como se dice, brindar. You know, anytime you have like people over, you know, you show that you know, you make sure they have anything you need, the hospitality, the friendliness. And that's why I still carry those things to my day. You know, I try to treat everyone around me as if they're a part of my family as well. You know, I try to make everybody feel welcome. I try to make everybody feel included. And those are things that my mom definitely passed on to me. My dad, I would say that it was more technical. My dad was very, very big into education. My dad is the one that inspired and still fuels my love for politics, both in the U.S. and in the Dominican Republic. He gets me very, very involved and keeps me very updated on anything. The only reason I know anything about politics in the Dominican Republic is because of my father. He is very involved. You know, he actually was one of the people that were just helping people vote in New York, you know, this past election. He's very, you know, he tells me, like, you know, the problems, he lays them out to me. He never tells me how to think. He just gives me the information and he lets me come to my own decisions, which I've always appreciated. He's also shown me how wonderful our country is. He's definitely the one that I've taken more trips to Dominican Republic to, and he's gone ahead and shown me basically the whole island. He's shown me the whole island, every city. I've gone coast to coast in the Dominican Republic, and I think that that's been so appreciative because I've been able to see where he grew up and I've been able to see how life is on that country. And I think that both of those have been something that I'll still carry.
There's 2 that really stand out for me, and one has to do with identity and the other is belonging. I learned English in school, and so in grammar school I spoke with an accent. I wore socks in the winter, or alpaca. You know, I had a lot of identifiers that, you know, stood out. And I also had the opportunity to travel and visit family back in South America. And I was always torn because here in the US, I felt like I didn't fit in. And then when I would go and visit family, I also felt like I didn't fit in. You know, they would say, oh, tú eres americano, you're American. And then when I'm here, they're like, no, you're not American, you're from wherever your parents are from. And so, you know, that was really hard on me. And that's one lesson I would want to teach my kids is that you dictate your own identity, right? You have a claim to that. And regardless of what other people say, whether or not you're not this or you're not that, or, you know, it's up to you. It's how you feel and how you express yourself, and that's your identity. too, about like belonging. Everyone's trying to find like what's the equal playing field, or what's the equalizer, right? And it was previously mentioned that, you know, education is a big push. So I think we often hear that, you know, education is the level playing field. That's something that cannot be taken from any of us, right? That you know, a degree is a degree regardless of what ethnicity or race you have. But what one thing is just, you know, and for our parents is about like success was the leveling playing field. So I just think that that's two things that I would want to do, is just like, you dictate your identity, and two, you belong, and you have the ability to show that you work hard to where you're at and achieving that level playing field.
Thank you. And Nelson?
Okay, what I still want to work toward my daughter and teaching her is the importance of faith. You know, the faith that we receive from our parents. I remember my mom teaching me how to pray. You know, the Our Father, the Hail Mary, and as all the different prayers that I know in Spanish, but I don't know in English. And when I tell this to my students, I say, "But you're supposed to know it." I say, "I'm sorry, no, I don't supposed to know it. I know what I know, and what I want to know in Spanish. Because it's my mother's remembrance, and that's it. I don't need to know it in English." And it's to keep that from my mom. It's to keep that inheritage from my mom, that she taught me how to pray. And here in Florida, specifically in South Florida, is Our Lady of Nuestra Señora del Cobre. Is, you know, for the Cubans, is very, very, you know, popular. And of course, I talked to my daughter. I tell about Our Lady of Nuestra Señora del Cobre, but also Our Lady of Guadalupe, you know, which is probably more universal for the Hispanics. But also I tell her the prayers that my mom taught me, and the novenas, because this is what is the face of the Hispanics. You know, is that this popular religiosity that is there is sometimes is a mix from the Afro descendants and from the indigenous people and from the mestizo people. All of these things that sometimes convey in the popular Catholicism as we know it. So I would like, I try hard on that, because my degree is in theology, and for her, she needs to know how to pray to the saints. I would like her to pray to the saints, because this is how I grew up, and I know the saints help, and I want her to know that she can pray and rely on the saints, because it's the faith that we get from our parents.
I actually felt connected to what everyone said, what Jorluis said, what Joshua said, what Nelson said. I felt really connected to. I have felt out of place my whole life, because I lived inside of a Cuban house surrounded by Mexicans. Going to Catholic school with a mixture of people, Dominicanos and Colombianos and Americanos. And here I'm Cuban American, but my culture in my community was mostly Mexican American. So I learned their culture. I went to their homes, I ate their food. My first husband was Mexican American. And then when I landed in Cuba, just recently, actually, a few years ago, to go visit my dad's, the place where he grew up, which was a pueblo. It's a pueblo. It's not on the map, but they all recognized me because I look like my dad. It was wonderful. But there I'm an Americana. There I'm a Yankee. And so my whole life I've felt out of place. People think I can speak Farsi. They think I'm from the Middle East. They talk to me. They think I'm from Mexico. They think I'm from Colombia. They think I'm from the Dominican Republic. Nobody ever guesses that I'm Cuban American. And so I really connected to that. And then Joshua talking about his mom and his dad. Oh my God, that brings so much warmth to my heart, because that's exactly the way my culture is, that the moms are the compassionate ones, the sweet ones, and they correct your grammar, and the dads are the technical ones, and they're the ones that take care of business, you know. And then Nelson talking about religion. The last thing I want to say is that when I went to Cuba, to watch them pray every time that we ate, it was such a different experience. They were so faithful. they were so faithful. They were so connected to God in a way that I never felt here, going to Catholic churches, you know, and even with my family. My mom is a devout Catholic. And it was just revived that connection. So when Nelson talked about that, I was like, absolutely, la caridad del cobre, you know? So thank you for letting me speak. I just wanted to tell you, I feel really connected to you all.
Thank you. And with our next question for the sons, if so, what are the differences with being raised as a male Latino versus the other ethnic groups or the other subgroups within Latinidad? And then for the parents, if so, what are the differences with raising a male Latino versus the other ethnic groups or other groups within Latinidad?
Male Latino. Well, I have to be honest with you. I haven't really treated it as a difference. Like any mom, I just wanted the best for my children. I wanted them to be as open-minded and as accepting as possible. That was really important to me. I feel like I'm much older than all of you, so I can comfortably say that I grew up in the 70s, and I learned Spanish on Sesame Street. That's how I learned, or English. I learned Spanish at home. I learned English on Sesame Street. So I like immediately, my neighborhood, the TV I was watching, everything about what I believed as a little girl and what I grew up believing was acceptance and love and the melting pot that is the United States. So that's really something that I have imbued in my children. So, they know where they come from. They know. But raising them as Latinos, you know, I haven't put as much effort as I would have into that. And I'm really hoping that they get curious and that they ask more questions as they grow up. And so my intention is to just maintain the connection I have with all of them for as long as I can, so that they have as much opportunity as they can to ask me questions about the questions I asked my parents about the place where they were born and the culture that they were born into.
So I think that for me, I definitely had, I guess just for complete, like, obviously for honesty, I think that I had what we would call a stereotypical male upbringing. And so having a younger sister, I definitely saw that stark difference. So, it was, we were the ones that did all the housework outside, anything like, my mom loved to remodel houses. I mean, the house that we moved into, she loved to remodel as we were doing all that stuff. Whereas where the expectation was, where my little sister would help out with, the cleaning and the laundry and all that stuff. So it was kind of like in that machista setting, but I actually see it breaking down now, even today, like I can even find how, even us as 4 siblings, we've kind of broken away from those molds. And I'm not saying that my mom tried to put us in these boxes of, you're the man, you do this, you're the woman, you do this. But I definitely think that we have transcended as ourselves. We've transcended those kind of stereotypes where, I take pride in cooking and cleaning, and my little sister is probably better with tools than I am, so she's like, she's over here like building projects, things like that. So I think that it definitely started off like that. I think that once, it wasn't until I actually started living alone that I started learning more of those that home ec type things where, how to cook properly, how to clean things properly, not just cleaning things just to get it out of the way, like actually cleaning and actually spending a day. Now I see the benefit of a cleaning day, but I was never expected to do those things as a child. And I think that was definitely something that, again, I don't fault my mom for, but I definitely think that some of that traditional Latinidad, that's how she was raised. She was raised, as the woman in a traditional role. But I think that along with my mother and along with us siblings, we've been able to transcend that. So I think that's been definitely interesting to see. And as compared, I think I know that we grew up Dominican American, but I think that's a very, at least in my experience, it's been a very common across all Latino ethnic subgroups. And as far as ethnic groups, I know that there's a little bit of difference. I know that sometimes Americans like my age or things like that, they will say like, stereotypes that, the Latinos, your women will take care of you, things like that. And I think that happens with a lot of different ethnic groups. But I think that things have been able to transcend, and I think that we've been able to show that, you don't have to put in these little boxes, you can do both, and it doesn't, I think that it's definitely moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Joshua. And yeah, Julie, what are your thoughts on this?
One of the things that, at least in the Latino culture, I feel like oftentimes as parents, we don't give our children their validity of their experience. So what I mean by that is, like, they may have an opinion on something, but will immediately dismiss it as, well, you're only so and so age, therefore you don't know what you're talking about, right? Or we minimize the roles that they can play within the family, right? And underestimate their abilities. And so how that looks in as far as gender, like, one thing I could definitely say, like, with sons having conversation about feelings or processing things is really not, it's uncommon. I think culturally we tend to, as males, try to just suck it up and push through, and not really try to figure out what's happening with us individually to try to find solutions. We just try to tough it out. And we expect the same of our sons. And I think a lot of times, if we actually were to pause and have a conversation to reflect, whether it be just what someone's feeling, or even having reflections and spirituality of just like, hey, I'm having doubts. Let's talk this through. It's just like, no one wants to show that level of vulnerability, or it's considered that it's something that's like feminine, right? And then vice versa, the expectation of that, our daughters are, we expect them to be more emotional and more open, but then we think that those emotional expressions are just over dramatic. And then we also limit what they're able to contribute. And I think you mentioned about Josh, like your sister having, or, being comfortable with tools. So I do that with my daughter, like, when I'm fixing stuff in the house, like, I have her pass me the tools and stuff like that. I do that with my son as well. And I encourage my son to talk about, like, what he's feeling, and things like that. So I think, that may vary from ethnic group to ethnic group. I think some of that, we see generationally, but with our children now, I think we're seeing more of an opportunity of having just more awareness of things.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, Nelson, how was it for you growing up in Colombia?
Growing up in Colombia, my mom one day say, I won't watch anybody close. And so we thought she was kidding, she was joking around. And so my mom didn't watch our clothes, and so we were asking each other, so now what? And she said, now you need to watch your clothes. That's it, simple. I'm tired. And so we started watching our clothes, my sister, my brother, and me, okay? And I say, I saw that as a punishment. But here in the United States, when I came here to the United States, this is what we're supposed to do. That's it. There is no other way. So as a parent now, I tell my daughter, okay, you see me, for example, ironing, and you see me cleaning, and you see me watching the clothes, and you're doing the laundry, all of these things. This is what you're supposed to do. But also you cannot let anybody like put you down because of your gender. There is no way. There's no way. So I don't know how in other ethnicities it will be. Probably it's more a gender role. Probably, I don't know. But at least for me, I do things in my home that in other Latinas or Latinos expect my wife to do it, and I just do it. I know how to do it. Simple. And in conversations in my school with my coworkers, they know, and several of us also, we do what we for example, we do the laundry. So, and they say, but you are Latino, so you are not a macho. I say, no, I don't think you know what is a macho. It's like that. So, I think this genderization need to be like avoided. Like the roles, because if you're a girl, you do this, because if you're a boy, you do things, specific things. I don't think so. I try to raise my daughter like having some kind of understanding of equality, participation, inclusion, all of these things, because it is important.
Thank you, Nelson. And to our last question, if you do, how do you have family conversations about inequalities?
We have a lot of conversations about inequality in our family, and I think it's because I have always, and my father was also like, sorry, the light is coming through. We're like agents of justice. You know, I grew up in a working class neighborhood because my dad didn't want to buy a house in the upper middle class neighborhood. He had the money, but he didn't like living there because he grew up in a village. And so for him, he's been very aware of the inequalities, or was very aware of the inequalities all his life. And so again, through action, I felt that growing up, and my children felt that. So we were constantly having conversations about social justice. It is a constant. And I'm a very strong, independent woman who was raised by a Cuban man. So I've never felt like there's anything I can't do. Like, I built my own car engine when I was 19. Like, I believe I can do anything, and my children were raised with that. Even, you know, they're boys. There was never any machista in our house. If it wasn't like more me than anybody else, I was the one that was like, we're going to do this and we're going to do it together. And then I got divorced from my first husband, and a few years later, about 3 years later, I met my current husband, and he identifies as Black. He is part Dominicano. He is part First Nation, and he is part African American, and he identifies as Black. But because he brought with him two sons, and I had three, my stepdaughter is from my first marriage, there were a lot of conversations about the different experiences we were having simply because of the color of our skin. So these are constant conversations. We're very open about it. I've been with my husband now since 2006, so for 14 years. And it just felt right, you know, and it opened our eyes because we are light-skinned Latinos. So we assimilate well, and we all speak without an accent, you know, and that was something that was very specific in my family. You needed to learn English without an accent. Even if all your friends around you had accents, I was not to have an accent. And but so our experience has been this assimilated light-skinned Latino with some racial injustice happening to us, but nothing to the extent that my husband has suffered or any of his relatives have suffered. So these are big conversations in our home, and they're open, and we have them openly. It's like nobody needs to call a family meeting. Somebody asks a question and we sit down to talk about it. And it's a cornerstone of our family, is to have these conversations about inequality and to be very aware, you know, that we're lucky. We are, and we're going to use what we have, our education and everything we have, to make it a just world for everybody, and that we love everybody. That's us.
With my dad, he's always been, you know, kind of like very, you know, like I mentioned earlier, into politics. So he's very intertwined with social justice issues, things like that. So it's always been incredibly easy to talk to him about inequalities, about things happening. And we've always been able to share that frustration together. With my mom kind of at the same time, she also understands, she was very realistic about a lot of the realities of America, especially for immigrants and especially for Latinos. So that one of the things that I know my mom told me, you know, right when I was born, she gave me and my two younger siblings American or white presenting names. So we all have kind of like, so, you know, and it's kind of always been, and her rationality for all of that has always been, you know, I don't want you guys to struggle. You know, I want you guys to be, you know, when you guys are applying to jobs, when you guys are out, you know, you guys can be, you know, that was my mom's kind of way of protecting us. And, you know, even though, you know, I'm fine with my name and everything like that, it always hurt me that she felt the need to do that. And I think that the way that we've always been able to address these, again, with my dad, it's always been an open book. You know, I call him up and we just rant back and forth. With my mom has definitely, one thing that we've been doing is working on our communication. We've started a family group chat, and my mom constantly looks to ask questions. You know, she's, you know, randomly, she'll be like, you know, I saw this article and I saw this, you know, like with example, with the Black Lives Matter protests, she actually asked me, she was like, you know, what, you know, what's rioting? You know, what's this? What's that? Why do people support this thing? Why do people support that? And I've been able to take the time to explain to her, and it's been a great experience because then we all get to talking. And I wouldn't call myself, I guess for my family, I've always been the point guy when it comes to social justice issues and things like that. Not because any of my siblings are, you know, ignorant to it or anything. It's just that I've definitely been the one kind of like that pays its own attention to that type of stuff. So it's always been a great conversation with not only my parents, but with my siblings. And it always leads to great conversations because they're always asking questions and they're always very, very engaged. And I think that these conversations have only gotten better throughout the years.
So I have a 9-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. So at that age, you tend to hesitate to talk about these topics, but I think it's really important because the way things are now, they're going to hear about it anyway. There's just a lot of exposure to it. And so the two inequalities I've touched on with them as a family, one had to do with immigration. So like back in 2016, so during the elections, and it's obviously still a huge topic, but during the presidential election, immigration was a huge thing. And so my children were aware of that conversation and they were scared. So when asking them like why they were scared it was because, you know, despite whatever, you know, citizenship status any of our family members had, they were afraid that our family had to leave, that grandma had to leave, or, you know, whomever had to leave. And having that conversation about like, well, you know, why do people want, you know, people who we identify with to have to leave, or what do they want Latinos to leave? And you know, what are these things that they're talking about us? And conversations in the schools, you know, students have, you know, made jokes about these things, so they've experienced that as well. So that's one of the things we've addressed, and just letting them know that, you know, that there is no need to fear. I mean, fear is natural. You're definitely going to be afraid and worry about, you know, our family members, but that you shouldn't have to fear of your identity, you know, and publicly expressing that. A second thing was about race. So we have to address racism with them. And the first time I talked about it, they didn't understand when I mentioned skin color. Like they were just like, what do you mean black? Like what do you mean brown? I don't understand why you're describing it in that way. Like, and that it dawned on me, like, I was just like, wow, like they didn't even understand the concept of just differentiating skin color. With these two things, immigration and race, it made them be afraid of being different. My kids actually said, I don't want to be brown, like I want to be white, because then people want to hate us or things like that, right? And so trying to balance those conversations with them so that they feel proud of who they are, but also not villainizing every other race or nationality so they feel that everyone's out to get them, right? It's just kind of having that balance of a conversation. So it's still ongoing. I think that's ongoing for all of us, regardless of our age. But those are two things that I've hit head on. And I'll continue those conversations with them.
Okay, I agree with George Louis. My daughter also had some kind of she was scared because I was legal resident, not citizen, like 2 years ago. And even though I could ask for my citizenship like since 2007, I didn't. I really, I just wait. But when all of these situations start, you know, being difficult with the immigrants and all of the things, so she said, you need to be a citizen. You know, you need to be a citizen because I don't want they to deport you. They cannot deport me, but that was, you know, she was scared of that. She was afraid of that. So I became a citizen. She knows that my grandma in Colombia, my grandma and my dad, from my dad's side, they couldn't get married until 20 years after living together, and probably 8 sons or something, 8 children, because my grandma was white and my grandpa was black. So even there in Colombia, we have this discrimination, and I tell this story to my students. I say, you know, I know what is discrimination. That is part of my family. I know. I have been a subject of discrimination here in the United States too. But we were in my teaching. I reinforce this in my family. I reinforce this. We are creating the image and likeness of God. This is our dignity. And if you are Catholic or Muslim or whatever you are, or black or red or blue, it doesn't matter. We need to respect each other because there is a basic principle. We are human beings. I don't care what you think. We could be totally different, but the basic thing, we are humans. And because we are humans, we're supposed to be included, and we're supposed to participate, and we're supposed to be to respect other people. Their roles are different things, So the moral understanding is we are human beings, we are equals.
With that said, that is all the time that we have. Thank you everyone for joining us. And now for everyone at home, make sure you like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on all our social media outlets at LatinEntertainment_presents. Also, check us out on our various podcast channels that we have. We have brought out to various mediums and we'd like for you to hear us as well. Lastly, tune in next week as we discuss growing up and raising queer. See you next time as Latin Entertainment presents Conversamos.
Yeah, yo, is it that wrong? I'm making a song, I'm taking it back for the platform that I formed. You should help me transform. I run the reservoir, the predator, like a hungry carnivore. When I'm breaking through these heavy doors, this is Desert Storm. A metaphor to show I'm equipped and informed. I'm striking with the mega force, I'm lukewarm, your crew swarms. With the fear, my lyrics do harm. If you ain't lending a hand, I'm breaking your two arms.